results, but
I've got a lot of followers over there too. I think like 6,000 or something.
yeah.
So, yeah. But I've been really working on it over the years too. So
Yeah, I'll add 20, 30 at a time, but still that hasn't equated into them giving me access to live. So I don't know. I'm going to have to ping them again.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think that it has more to do with activity than followers. I think they're looking at how engaged you are, would be my guess.
With probably on their platform.
On their platform, yeah.
Yeah, so that's probably explaining it, because I absolutely hate Twitter. LinkedIn Mail. I just get spammed to death. And you follow someone and they send you 10 messages, and I almost want to just block people when they do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay, I think we're up. Okay, bad host, didn't get the logo set, but I'll do that here. There we go, got it.
Lots of buttons to push and
yeah,
gadgets to enable.
And I'm almost 90% sure I didn't hit the video recorder. I'm really a bad host. So you guys talk for a few seconds and I'll come back.
Okay. All right. Well, Heather, thanks for joining us. It'd be great to get your thoughts on what's happening in the advertising side of things out there. I know you're living and breathing it every day.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's good to be here, and I'm excited to talk about, like I said, one of my favorite subjects, which is podcast advertising.
Yes.
I could talk about it all day sometimes.
Right. You might as well talk about it on Saturdays too, right?
That's right. Yeah, why not?
Okay. Sorry, everyone that's been waiting for, especially those of you on YouTube and other places. Hey, welcome to the new media show. My name is Todd Cochran. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Rob Greenlee. Rob, good morning. How are you? And
doing terrific, Todd.
Hey, you want to do our introduction this morning?
Well, we've got Heather Osgood here, who's been running a podcast advertising company, agency. I'm not quite sure how you like to describe it. If it's a consulting firm, I know you're doing a lot of great stuff on LinkedIn around trying to educate people, and I see you showing up as a speaker at more and more events, and you're running a company called True Native Media, which is a name that is very true to the native side of podcasting on the advertising side. So I think it's awesome to have you here, and been watching your videos, and you're getting more and more into helping people, start podcasts and doing all sorts of stuff. So I thought maybe we'd have you on to talk about what you're seeing in the podcast medium right now on the advertising side. I think it's an interesting time, and it's been a transition period for podcast advertising too, but I think it's still growing. But welcome to the show, Heather. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
Hey, again, welcome, Heather, and Rob. Thanks for that nice introduction. I tell you, I've got two things I want to start the show off with, and then Heather, I want to jump into, but I didn't want to ignore something that came out yesterday that I watched. Rob, or I don't know if either one of you saw this, but the gentleman that's leaving Spotify.
Oh yeah,
did a very
Joe Budden. Yeah.
Did a very public. Oh man, smash down in the only way he can of that relationship, and it doesn't sound like it is ending well.
No, that's true. That's true. So, it's a hot topic in the medium right now, no question about it. And Todd, I think it gets back to what we were talking about just a couple weeks ago, I guess, about podcasters kind of, start thinking about their value a little bit more, right?
Yeah. And you know what really raised my hackles is, he's kind of being careful and saying some things, and, he's talking about other deals that have come in. I'm trying to ignore that. I'm trying to figure out what they did to make him upset. And it sounds like at the beginning, got a nice check,
right?
Made a deal, had performance benchmarks to make, and then come September of last year, supposed to get a bonus. They were expecting a 6-figure bonus, and like he said, like $500,000. And when they went and talked to them, it was about nothing about downloads. It was all about streams, active time listening, and it was all. And he said, "Hey, this is the same beep 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 that the music industry
on the music side, sure,
the music industries went through." And Heather, I don't know if you've listened to the show much or not, but Rob and I have been on this thing for a while now that podcasters need to be careful what they wish for. And with the corporate podcasting suits coming in, we are being regulated. No, not regulated, relegated to following the same path if we don't be careful. And with them having more and more power on what advertising dollars are going into them, we're going to be left with pennies. And but one thing I did fall back on, and something he said was, "I own my stuff, and we're out of here." And the beauty is, he recognized early on, because he'd come from the music business, that potentially this could happen. So, I'll be a fair warning. It's not child safe.
Right.
So if you watch the 23, and I want to listen to the whole podcast now because they just gave us a snippet of it. There's more.
Right.
But it just goes back to what we've been talking about for a long time. I don't know. I hope Joe Rogan, I know Joe's smart, but let's hope his contract was a little more detailed than the Budden's.
Well, and I think that, Joe's contract probably has Rogan's contract. I think maybe had a little bit of influence here, and he also mentioned about Spotify going up and buying all Pearcast and Gimlet and all these and spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these companies, but yet he felt like that he brought so many listeners from his show over to Spotify that and it was just accelerating and growing, that he thought he had a lot more value. And I think that the deal certainly, there's a little bit of ego here. I mean, there's no question about that. As Spotify is doing these other deals with these other larger podcasters, I think he feels like he deserves to be in that same rare air, right? And so, I think we've seen this a little bit in the past too, around talent coming in, taking a deal with a network and signing a contract, and then they blow up and become successful, and then they want to hop back in there and renegotiate the deal, or they want more money, or this is a common thing in Hollywood.
But he said he honored his deal. He didn't go back for more money.
Probably did, right? So he's saying that the contract was honored, and Spotify didn't come through. Is that?
That's what he's implying on the bonus specifically. Right. I'm sure the other part of the deal probably followed through, but it seems the main contention point was that they went up to the 6th floor or whatever, and they gave him the rain, threw him a bunch of charts in front of them.
Right.
And this
trying to downplay.
Right. And this
probably his performance.
And this is why in the podcasting space, why the download will never die. And this is why CPM will remain king. Now, Heather, you may disagree with me on that because I saw something on your guys' page, but I think there's a good combination here of being able to have the ability to influence, which you're going to run any advertising in a podcast. If you can't influence your listeners to do something, then you're not going to get paid for very long anyway. But I just think that this is fair warning to podcasters. And and Heather, Rob and I had approached the idea of, is it time that podcasters are paid for our content being on these platforms? And that's probably a discussion for another day, because we killed that one for about 2 episodes in a row. But
I think that podcasts need to be more aware of what they're doing when they get kind of into bed with these different platforms. I think that we definitely see, even with the Amazon Music and Audible thing coming up, though we've got all these podcasts that are excited to get their content out there, which they should be, and we want them to have distribution in as many places as possible. But I think oftentimes, especially, you've got the upper echelon podcasts that, like the Joe Rogans, that are, in a league of their own. But I think the mass of the podcasts out there are just people who are trying to get as many downloads as they can. They're trying to get those impressions and those followers. And so they just have a tendency of running to all of these different platforms, assuming that, their content's kind of safe there. And I think people don't do a good enough job really reading the terms and the conditions of what this agreement does to their content. And as we see these bigger players who are really trying to move into the space in a big way, they want all the control. And they're essentially saying, hey, we're the big dog. We can do what we want to do. And if you want to play by our rules, come in, which of course, I mean, they can do that. Those are their companies, right? They have the right to do what they want to do. But I think as podcasters, like you said, Todd, we really need to make sure that the podcasters are seeing the value that they bring to the table. I mean, the reason that Spotify is so excited to have podcasts on because they don't have to pay for that content like they have to with music. So it's interesting to, look at what's unfolding. And I think that podcasters need to be really cautious.
But you, Rob, and I can all high five and agree to that in a New York second, and we're all on the same page, and we don't have any qualms about knowing what we're getting into. But I'm just it goes to the core of podcasting.
Right. It's independent or aligning with the big networks. Are we going to fall back into an old gatekeeper corporate media paradigm?
There was no gatekeepers for podcasting, and it's not. Oh my God, the sky is falling, because we are still largely with no gatekeepers, thanks to Apple and Google Podcasts and everyone else that it's out there. But I truly believe, at least us at Blueberry, we're seeing a decline in the number of people that are listening to podcasts on Spotify. And it's been consistently. I think the honeymoon is over for Spotify. Now, other platforms are starting to make some gains. Google Podcasts, huge gains in the past 3 to 4 months. Huge. I mean, like eye-popping huge gains.
Well, Todd, it could also be that Spotify is directing more listenership to podcasts that through these exclusive deals over to the Spotify platform, and that wouldn't run through your network too. So, you just look at when Joe Rogan launches over there.
Right.
That's not going to be hosted on Libsyn anymore. So we're not going to see those numbers. So that's going to disappear into the ether of Spotify. Right. And you could beg the question, is the Joe Rogan Experience podcast going to be available on any other platform other than Spotify? Probably not. So is it really a podcast?
No. So I had a guy I was talking to yesterday. He's got something going. He says, I want to do an exclusive deal with iHeart. I said, well, don't talk to me. You got to go talk to iHeart. And I says, your show hasn't even launched yet. They're not going to talk to you.
Right.
You can go pitch them. I said, but I'm not the guy to make. Why would I introduce you to iHeart? I'm a podcast hosting company. I want your business. I don't want you to go to iHeart. Go knock yourself out. Go talk to them. But I said, oh, and by the way, iHeart globally has less than 1% of total listening market share. So they're advertising their shows. And I'm sure those shows are doing great, but everyone else, not getting anything over there. So,
yeah, and I think it's also gets back to too. And I had this conversation here this past week too around programmatic platforms too, and Heather, jump in here on this too, of the view that the programmatic side, and there's still there's a consistent push and trying to drive people into that, that the CPMs are so low, and is it because we're not valuing podcast advertising through programmatic platforms as much as we should be? I don't. Heather, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I am astonished at how low some of the CPMs are with programmatic ad buying. I mean, if you look at host read ads and what the CPMs are that we're getting for host read ads. It's, I mean, they're miles apart. It's crazy to me. And I think that we have to decide as an industry what we are able to put forward and what we're going to accept. But to me, that gets into the bigger question of where is the place of programmatic ad buying within the podcast space, and is programmatic more valuable, or is it important to the growth of the industry, or should the host-read ad, remain the king of advertising in this space? And my opinion is that host-read ads are going to be what continues to differentiate us between every other marketing platform, because my issue with programmatic, there's nothing wrong with it. And when you get up into the larger companies and the larger agencies, what we see is that they are so interested in doing geo-targeting that it makes it difficult to not buy in a programmatic fashion. But when we look at what the value is, the problem is that when we go to this programmatic place, then we throw our hat in the ring with all other forms of digital marketing, and there's no real differentiation. So if there's no differentiation, then hey, if they're paying a $2 or $3 CPM over here for this digital, advertising form, why would they choose to pay a $20 or a $30 CPM in podcasting? So I think it really just depends on the approach that we want to take as an industry. And in my opinion, we still have so much more to offer to the world with host-read ads.
And the geographic stuff is hard because there's usually not enough volume, because, and so, that's,
you're splitting and dicing your audience.
Yeah. Right. And you're it's, if they're going to do a national buy and do 10 regions, but if they want to do 299 regions by Nielsen, the Nielsen regions, then it's like this administrative absolute god nightmare to execute, and you have to raise the CPMs or you don't make no money. So it's a double-edged sword. But the host endorsing, I had media buyers that stopped a couple of years ago. They're coming back to space, and when I'm telling them $35 CPM for host reads, they're falling over. I'm like, that's what I'm charging now, 35. And maybe for some stuff 25. But I says the market is changed, and the value, people are starting to figure out the value on host-read ads and what they're truly delivering. And, I say, hey, I'll do 25. You buy 6 months. Oh, we want to buy a month. I'm not doing I don't even do 1 month deal. I refuse. I do 3-month deals, or I don't do a deal at all. It's not worth the time. So I don't know. It's just, the media buyers it's an interesting time.
You pulled back. Because I was like, I've been thinking about this for a while too, around programmatic, and I think that the ad types that typically fall through the programmatic platforms is more like radio ads, right? And then the host reads are typically, oh boy.
Hey, you got a train, Rob.
I know, exactly. The host reads are typically baked into the content, right? So, but if you look at the technology side of this, there's nothing wrong with the programmatic stuff as far as in the dynamic ad insertion aspect of this. I think it can be leveraged across archives, and you can do a lot of cool stuff. But I think at the end of the day, it's programmatic's gotten linked up with a certain type of ad copy type content, right? It's more like online radio or radio type advertising copy. And I keep wondering if the pre-recorded host reads is going to be, it's going to get some traction. But I also get a sense, and Heather, jump in on this too, the ad buyers don't like the pre-recorded host reads as much, and they devalue it because it's not baked in. So I don't know. What's your thought on the direction of this?
Yeah, truthfully, that I would say is probably my biggest soapbox in podcast advertising right now. Is number one, I really, really believe that we should all head dynamic ad insertion, because to your point, Rob, the reality is that you have all of this back catalog inventory, right? And the way I look at it is it doesn't matter when content is created, it matters when content is consumed. So in every other medium out there, if I'm watching a YouTube video today, it doesn't matter if that YouTube video was created in 2010, they're going to serve me an ad message, right? And so the fact that we've got all of this content that is being consumed on a regular basis without any ad messages in it is really silly. However, I think when people hear dynamic ad insertion, they immediately go to those pre-recorded, radio type ads. And in my opinion, we can do a really good job with post-read ads that are dynamically inserted. And so I really push advertisers to that because from my perspective, the value outweighs, the downside, which the downside is the long tail. So that's what they'll always say. Oh, there's not a long tail with dynamic ad insertion, because when you've got a baked in ad, people continue to listen to it even after
forever.
The advertiser has stopped paying for it. But when we're looking at dynamic ad insertion, if we can look at it, let's say for a month period of time, number one, you get 100% reach of that audience. So instead of just getting a small portion of reach, you get to reach their entire audience, and you can be really timely with your messages. So you can make sure that the ad that someone is hearing today is actually relevant. Because how many of us have heard an ad where it's like, hey, we've got a great event coming up. It's going to be next February, and you're like, okay, I know that was 3 years ago, and it's not relevant.
But, and this is the reason why we waited so long to build an ad insertion platform. I have a global view of 60 to 70,000 shows. Mm-hmm. Today, and we run the numbers about a month ago, approximately 90% of all podcasts in our inventory deliver 90% of their lifetime downloads within the first 96 hours. So for most, 90% of the podcast inventory out there, they do this. It goes up, it's done, and it's done. It's up, consumed, and it's done. A lot of podcasts say, oh, I've got long tail. No, you don't have long tail. 2, 3, 10, 15 downloads.
Most don't. I agree.
That is not long tail. Now, 10%, super valuable. Super, super, super valuable. So 90% of the entire podcasting space globally does not need ad injection. You do a host read ad and 90% of it, it's never going to be heard a year from now because no one's going to listen to that episode. But if you listen to Grammar Girl, you need new ads in there because her stuff gets as many downloads in month.
Very evergreen.
Yeah, in month 100 is it? But there are very, very, very few true evergreen shows. Even those that say they are. I look at it month after month. I have 5, 6 years of history on shows. No beat. I mean, it's as flat as it's as flat as that line when you die. I mean, it is flat. So,
well, Todd, it's a content question, right? That's really what you cut to the chase here, and I think we've seen a strong uptick in like true crime and storytelling and things like that, which do lend itself to long tail advertising. Yeah. And are you seeing that too, to Heather, that the storytelling stuff has really given new life to the archive side of things?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, when you've got that storytelling content, it really is evergreen. And we talked with a company the other day who's interested in representation. They're literally creating one 90-minute audio drama, and that's going to be their entire podcast, right? And they're looking to launch this and, it's essentially like a podcast movie is the way I look at it, is they're launching a podcast movie and they're going, they're going to do a lot of promotion around it when it comes out. Like the first month, it'll probably get some good traction, but then it's going to continue, hopefully, to build interest. Now, I think one of the interesting questions about something like this is how long will it be live, right? How will it have a year-long life? Will it have a 2-year life? So I feel like that's kind of interesting. But I think there's a lot of that coming into the space. To me, is really fun because while, of course, all of the interview type shows are great, I think that having more kind of original content podcast makes it really interesting and fun, and it changes the medium.
But I still remain, based on the data I see, I just remain doubtful. I really
you remain doubtful that they will continue to get downloads? You feel like they're just it'll be they'll get some, like you said, in the first maybe 30 to 60 days, and then
they have to do ongoing heavy duty promotion continuously. And where do they really truly discover more audience? They're going to have to spend money to make money. They're going to have to advertise on other shows. They're going to, there's going to, it'll be interesting. I'd like to hear a year from now how they're doing on that. I think you have to have this, even on the true crime ones, when they say, oh, I'm going to do 12 episode run and then I'm going to take 6 months breaks. I tell them you're not serial. And, you might be able to take 3 months off if you pre-announce that through all 12 episodes, that you're going to do 12 episodes and you'll be back in 3 months. But that's not how podcasting is consumed. Podcasting is consumed by people building you into their lives. And when you're gone, you're gone. They find something else to listen to. And maybe, but then again, Rob, they drop that media file into the serial episode and they end up on the number 1 list or whatever it is, because that episode got downloaded a huge number of times.
Yeah, I'm curious why they chose to do a 90-minute audio episode and didn't choose to break it up like into maybe 3 episodes or 4 episodes or something like that. I'm just curious why they chose that.
Yeah.
It's the first time I've heard anybody doing something like that.
And
no, I agree with you, Todd. I think that podcasts are consumed on an ongoing basis, and it is really difficult to create, traction if you don't have ongoing content. I also think that oftentimes people, who want to do seasons, which I think seasons are a really good idea for podcasts, especially for people who are just getting into it. But I also think that what are you doing in that break period? Is there something else, maybe that you could create that isn't a full-blown episode that takes you 10 hours to produce? Could you do something shorter that is just keeping you top of mind with your listeners so that they know that you're there and that you're still working on great content for them?
I always tell podcasters, your first 2 years, if you're going to do seasons, and you're going to laugh, Heather. Season 1 ends on Friday and season 2 begins the following Monday for the first 2 years.
Right. So it begs the question, why do seasons, right? What's the purpose?
But again, there are some shows, and again, it's not, Todd doesn't have this like magic wand. It says that your show's going to fail because you took 3 months off. But I just, after having been here a while, I kind of know that it's just the way things kind of work, especially if you start out and get a good bump. Let's say you go to 15,000 listeners on a 12 episode series and have this fantastic launch and fantastic growth, you probably can do a 3-month break. You can probably afford to. But if you've only got 1,000 listeners at the end of the 12 episodes, you need to keep on. You need to keep building.
Yeah, I can see that, because it's like starting from scratch every single time you launch a new season, right? Like, yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that is so crazy about our world today is how much content there is out there to consume. So I feel like sometimes I'll listen to a podcast and I'll think, man, I love this show so much, I need to listen to it more often. But then the next one comes and I think the exact same thing. And I only have so many hours in my life, and as does everyone. And so you can only listen to so many shows. And if you're not keeping top of mind, with your audience, then it's very easy to lose their attention.
I think at the same point too is the longer you do a show, and I've said this many times, is that it's kind of like this bell curve. Well, not even bell curve. It's just like people come on, they listen, they get sick of you and they leave. And then if you're continuing to podcast, maybe they'll come back in a year. Oh, you're still here. Great. And they'll start listening again for all till they get sick of you again. But people just get sick of hearing the same person sometimes, regardless of how good the content is. Now, if you're Joe Rogan, hey, that's a fan base. That's a whole different, he's a whole different dynamic. So if you've got that power, keep people, but most podcasters don't. They have to work hard.
I just think that Joe's going to lose a big chunk of his audience. I don't know about you. I think he's going to, I don't know if he's going to drop a third or.
I try to like Spotify, but I don't like it.
Yeah.
When I go onto the platform, I don't like the listening experience. I don't like the discoverability. I just personally, I don't know. I just don't like it. And I think that the other thing, and I don't know how much all of this plays into it, but with Anchor having those pirated shows, I feel like happens a lot when I go on some of those bigger platforms. I'll look and I feel like I see like dummy shows where I'm like, this isn't what I'm looking for, and that it's not like the true, real Joe Rogan show. So I don't know. I don't personally feel like it's as easy a listening experience. As much as people like to criticize Apple, I think it's easier to listen to podcasts there than it is on Spotify.
Although
personally.
I've got team members on my team that absolutely love Spotify. And then I look at the age range.
It's an age demo question.
It's
right?
a demo. It's a demo.
Younger.
I think it's demo. I really do. I prefer Pandora over Spotify, which I have. It's easier to find some sort of mood music, or if I want to listen to, I'm looking for a whatever track, whatever type of mood track, and I can find it easy on. If I want to listen to Latin, it's easy. If I want to listen to the greatest hits, it's easy on Pandora. I don't find it as simple as that on Spotify, and definitely not a good experience for listening to podcasts. But some people love it, so I'm glad they're here. But there is issues with what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I like about Spotify is that when you put in, if I'm looking for a specific guest, if I put that guest into the search, I think that they come up with better options than some of the other players I've used. So I like that feature on Spotify, but that's really the only feature that I have found that I like on that platform. So yeah, we'll see. And I think, kind of bringing it back to advertising, I think one of the things that's most interesting to me about the deal with Spotify and Joe Rogan is that they don't have, they didn't buy the ad right for the show, which seems very bizarre to me.
Well, it was brilliant on Joe's part. I'm sure they're going to advertise on the ends, and then Joe's going to fill it up in the middle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it was more about grabbing audience share.
Yes, for sure.
And I think that's what I definitely picked up from the Joe Budden argument, is that that's the trading value, right? That's going on right now. It's bringing those unique audience members over to Spotify, right? So if they can get you over there, that means, especially on an exclusive deal, then the bargain that's being made is you're going to bring your audience over there. Now, it's the same thing that Mr. Howard Stern did to Sirius XM, right?
And I've never had listened to a Joe Budden podcast before, but I became a super fan of him just in that 23-minute YouTube video. Here's why. Here's why.
I think I know why, Todd.
He gets it. He gets it. He understands the value. He's over the top, says what he is. He's got a big ego. That's fine. He can be but he understands what podcasting really, the true value. And to me, it's just like, we need some bigger names in the podcasting space to be emphasizing the cautions and things because I can sit here all day and beat a drum. Rob, you can too. And we're just two old curmudgeons making comments about the space. Right. And when you have a creator that is very, very successful and he's pissed because he felt he has been dealt a bad hand and treated like a music artist, to me, that is just like, wake up, people. Let's make sure we're protecting the base and doing what we have to do to keep podcasting moving forward, be an open platform, and I just want podcasters to make sure they make good decisions. If they're going to go sign with Spotify, great, cash that check. And
I mean, Todd, at the end of the day, I think this raises a very interesting question, and that's, and all signs kind of point back to Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan his podcast wasn't heard on Spotify until he did that deal. So and the reason that Joe Rogan didn't want to be on Spotify was because of how Spotify treats music artists.
Right.
And doesn't pay them very much. So you think about that question, and it gets back to, how much control do we have over the distribution of our show? And that's what we're trading on. And Joe made this value equation that he'd rather get paid. I mean, we don't know how much he's getting paid. Really, it was all a rumor. It could be 150 million, 200 million. Who knows what the performance incentives were? We just don't know. But for Joe to make that move tells me that it was a very lucrative deal, because Joe was against being over there for the same reason that Joe Button is raising concerns. Joe didn't get as good a deal. Joe Button didn't get as good a deal as Joe Rogan did, I think, is what it really kind of comes down to.
And Joe Button indicated that he wrote the contract knowing how he got screwed as a music artist. So I thought, wow, if he took precautions knowing that he got screwed as a music artist and he was protecting himself that way, and yet still feel he got screwed? Whoa.
Yeah.
They just find a new way to not pay you.
But Todd, it also raises the question that, the position that you've had for many years about this medium is the content creator needs to own what they do, right?
Everything.
And not just even hand off licensing.
Right. Yeah,
website,
everything.
That comes with a price, right?
Yeah.
Control.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with a podcaster that is, and it's going to be an interview next week on Podcast Insider. It's probably one of the best podcast interviews I've done in years. And every time the gentleman was saying something, I was shaking my head yes. And he basically does, it's called Actor CEO. And it talks about how actors not only have to be actors, but they have to be good business people to steward the money they're making. And they're independent contractors when they do movies. And he just talked about what he did with his show. And I'm just shaking my head. I'm like, my God, I need to put you on a speaking circuit somewhere to make podcasters listen to you, to understand this value and what you have built. And I understand not everyone wants to be super, super serious, but there's a lot of people that do, and they make such big fundamental mistakes early on that they end up having to, rework their systems. And
I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of podcasts make is that they don't treat their podcast like a business. And that always really shocks me, that they go into it with no real plan or no real structure. And I think that you benefit so much when you approach your podcast like a business from every perspective. The other thing that I think is very bizarre is that I have a podcast that's been very, very successful. And she's like, I just decided I'm done with my show. I don't want to produce it anymore. And I'm like, why don't you sell it? Like, in any other business, you wouldn't just stop. You would sell it. You would think, it just, so I feel like we have so much opportunity in podcasts, but because podcasters aren't approaching their podcast like businesses, they aren't getting the full benefit they could.
Or they're on an ad deal and you're week 6 in and, hey, where's your report for the week? Oh, I went on vacation. Or
exactly.
I'm like, really? You went on vacation? Or it's just, I've seen it all. Heather, you have too. And, so it's one of those situations where I actually got tired of being a jerk, because I had to be a jerk to the podcasters. I'm like, you don't do this, I'm going to blacklist you. I just told them, I won't give you another ad deal because you screwed me, and it really is, it's not what I like to do. But I think it goes back to the point that I think sometimes podcasters don't understand the value they're bringing, and it's kind of disrespectful a little bit to their audience as well. You got this audience that loves you and you're following you, and, and I know.
Well, I do. I mean, it's a great topic actually that Heather just brought up. Should you, or could you, or is it even viable to sell your podcast, right? As a business, I think I think it depends on the podcast. I think it depends on the relationship with the audience, whether or not that can really be pulled off. I don't know. I mean, so Heather, have you seen it happen? And what was the experience that the podcaster went through in doing it? Of selling your podcast?
I haven't seen that happen. The only thing that I have seen is I have seen an entity that owned the podcast, and then they had like revolving hosts. So the host would come in, and the the entity owned the podcast and the host was like a separate, wasn't the owner of the show. Or sometimes I've also seen it where you'll have an owner of the show and then they'll hire co-hosts to come in and, they don't own the show with them. They only get like a percentage. But I do really believe you could absolutely sell a show. And part of the reason I think it's so sellable is that it's not easy to build an audience. And if you would have to, of course, create a very good transition plan. I don't think that you could just drop it like a hot rock and then have somebody new step in the next week. But if you did create a really good transition plan, there's a lot of value in an audience that has been created. I think especially, I don't know if you guys see this, but when we look at shows that are maybe in that, I don't know, anywhere from like 5 to 7 years old, it was much easier to create a larger audience, I think, at the beginning when people first started podcasts, first when podcasts kind of got more serious, I guess I should say. Right. And so I think now I'll have a podcaster who's been podcasting for a long time, and then they'll say, I'm going to start a new show. And they just assume that, hey, if they're getting, 30,000 downloads per episode on their current show, that they can easily do that on a new show. And then they don't. And then they realize how hard it is now, or how different things are today. And so in my opinion, if you've already got a really built-in audience, and especially obviously it does depend a lot on topic and the whole genre of the show. But if you have something that is an industry, for instance, where you could pass it to another industry expert, I think that I think it's very sellable.
Interesting. Rob and I know that oftentimes the shows him and I do alone get more numbers than like when you have a guest on like you. It's kind of an odd dynamic. So I don't know. I think there's been a few successful shows. I'm in the business of actually buying domains. I know a show dies, I try to go get the domain. If I can get the domain, I'm more interested in the domain than the show sometimes. But, and it's personal. It's not what Blueberry does. It's something I personally do. And let's just be clear on that. So I don't know. I think that if you have a show that's got significant growth, but it's hard to, how do you find somebody? That's the next thing. There's one, can I switch a topic a little bit? Have we killed this dead horse, or we need to go a little further? Or
no, I think change it.
Yeah. So I got a question for you, Heather, and it came off your Twitter feed, not Twitter feed, but your Twitter page. It says, "Forget CPM. This is about influence, turning podcast sponsorships and advertising on its ear." So I'm real curious. I keep hearing about. I truly believe that without influence and without engagement, you can have all the advertising in the world, as I said in the beginning of the show, and it still won't go anywhere. So how are you, obviously you're doing a lot of stuff that's on CPM, but also you're bringing added value. Is that where you're getting more money, is on the influence side, or how? Talk to me a little bit about that with your business.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like that statement is meant more as a metaphor than it is as an actual dollar and cents kind of, transaction. So, typically, I think that podcasters are not thought of as being influencers enough. True. And so I constantly, in every conversation that I have, especially with a business that is new to podcast advertising, I will say the value that we are bringing to the table here is this post-read ad. So, people don't listen to your podcast here because the two of you are superstars, right? They're not like, oh man, these two are superstars. I have to follow them. I'm so interested. They listen to this show because they know that both of you are extremely knowledgeable about the industry. They want your insights, and they are listening to you because of who you are, not because of your superstar status. And in my opinion, I think that when you follow someone who is, a leader in your industry, or someone that is part of your everyday world, I think that person has more influence over you sometimes than a superstar does, because they're somebody that like, and trust. And as we all know with podcasts, it's literally like that person's voice is in your head, right? You listen to them so much that they feel like a friend to you. And so when they come to the table, and one of the things that fascinates me about podcast advertising is that in my prior career in advertising, if somebody came to the table and they had, $20,000 to spend on an ad campaign, we'd say, great, when can you get started? But with podcast ads, because they are host read, I am shocked at the number of times that podcasters will turn down advertisers and I'm like, really?
Right. Yeah.
Are you sure you don't want this company? They seem like a perfect fit for you.
You're like, what?
What? Yeah.
Yeah. Why? Money? You don't want money? What's wrong?
Yeah. But it really does happen a lot. And
I know.
So when we hear host read ads, sometimes I wish that I could get this message out there more. When you hear a host read ad, that host actually really does like that product, right?
Right.
And so there is a lot of influence that happens there. And so when we start an ad negotiation, I think we have to start with the influence the podcast host brings to the campaign. And how do you value that? It's not merely just a CPM. It's not merely just a price. It's all of that person and everything that they bring to the table. It's like we've just been talking about. It's the years that they've spent acquiring an audience to follow them. And that is worth so much. And so of course, we base all of our pricing on a CPM model. And I do think, price integrity is important. This year's been interesting, but it still is very important. But let's start with one. So that's essentially what I meant by that
Awesome.
comment.
So I had a call from a guy from Hollywood, and this guy is big in space. If I said his name, people would almost immediately know who he is. And he does product placement in movies like the Coke or the Michelin tires or whatever it may be. He does all these placement in movies. So we're talking about product placement in podcasts and disclosure and how all that would work. And I told him, I said, I've been drinking Red Bull on my show for 10 years.
I was wondering if Red Bull was an underwriter of the program.
It's right over your head too, Todd.
And it's because I like Red Bull. They do not sponsor the show. They've never given me a penny. I don't get any free product, nothing. I like Red Bull. But I wish they would sponsor the show. But he said, you're going about it wrong. He says, Red Bull's established. He says, you shouldn't drink Red Bull. He said, and I'm going to put it up on the screen. He said, you should drink BAM. He said, and I said, I've never had a BAM. I don't know if I like a BAM. He said, it doesn't matter. You should drink BAM and have BAM be your sponsor, one of your sponsors, underwriters on your show. But I'm like, it goes back to your point, Heather. What if I don't like BAM? What if BAM sucks? What if BAM tastes terrible? Then my audience is going to be pissed off and I lose integrity. And I tried to explain that to him. Mm-hmm. And it was like, that's the most foreign thing I've ever heard. So he is in the business of putting product placement in movies. And guess what? No one cares because guess what? The actors don't get a cut of that unless they're drinking some BAM. But if you go on TikTok, you go on Instagram, you see all these people that are doing these product placements all the time. They're brand influencers, quote unquote. And he says, I would only do brand placement in podcasts if they were doing live video. And they have to be doing 500,000 listeners per episode. And I'm like, well, that's like 10 shows or 20.
That's probably okay with him though.
And he says, we want to do a bigger deal. And I'm like, you do realize that there are millions and millions and millions of downloads that are happening by people that have heavy influence of space, that if they said, I like BAM versus Red Bull, that we could move the bar in a big, big way. But I said, we'd have to have the product people try it. I said, you're going to have to send out, 500 cases of this and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And to him, that was completely foreign. But I think if you're going to have influence campaigns, if we're going to evolve and not just advertise for stamps.com, which probably most people don't really use anyway, or whatever de jour product there is, I think podcasters are most set to be able to promote products that they use every day and probably influence their audience to buy it. It's been a running joke on my show for years. I mean, because I was talking about Red Bull 10 years ago about how they'd be a good sponsor of the show. They've never called me. Don't ever expect them to either, because I'm not a sports person. You don't think of a podcast as somebody that's drinking Red Bull, but I think there's huge opportunity in some sort of brand campaigns, but maybe it's just too much work.
Well, Todd, I think you raise a really important topic here, and that's what built podcast advertising. If you go back to the very early days, with what was authenticity, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was trust. It was trust.
Why is GoDaddy still with me for 15 years?
Right. And this guy is selling on inauthentic, non-trustworthy relationships.
Displacement. That's it.
Right. And that's the part that he's missing, is he's not understanding this medium as a native trust relationship medium. And that's really where the difference was between you guys.
Many, many years ago, before I was ever in podcasting space, I had a very, very close friend. His name was Scott Brayton. He was an Indy car driver. Sadly, he died in time trials at Indy by hitting the pit wall a number of years ago. Quite devastating. He had Amway as a sponsor. And him and I we'd talk about the stuff that was on the car and how they got their value. And he said there was someone that was from that media buy. They would be watching every race, and then they would hit the stopwatch the second that car was in camera where the word Amway was being set, and click it when it went out. And then they took all that time, and anytime there was an interview, anything to get how many seconds of airtime they've got. And that's how they valued
the sponsorship. Right.
So it wasn't necessarily that I was, Scott Brayton was my good friend. I didn't care who his sponsor was. I followed the car because he was driving it. But yet, was I loyal to his product? Well, there really wasn't a product to buy. I wasn't an Amway sponsor. I wasn't an Amway dealer, but it probably drove a lot of people to consider. So, same thing with Pennzoil and everything else that's on the side of these vehicles. So podcasting, I think, has a way to do this, but we're in somebody's ear, not through somebody's eyeball. So,
well, Todd, I think we're in an era now, I think especially the last few years, where that authentic host brand relationship on a podcast is solely being, it's being eroded, right? So we're falling back into a more traditional advertising model where you're just running whatever ads available in your show. Sure, it may have an affinity with your audience.
Heather,
the advertiser sees.
You have people walk away from ad deals all the time. And is it because I truly believe there is still authenticity in podcast advertising? They walk away from deals for a reason, right?
Well,
I do really believe that there is still authenticity in podcast advertising. I think that like I said, people do walk away from deals. I think that the difference is that you've got those people out there who are just really interested in making money on ads. So what I find are that there are two groups of podcasters. You've got the podcasters who have worked really hard to build their audience. And because they've worked so hard to build their audience, they're very protective of them, and they don't want to expose them to messages that they don't think are good. So like, for instance, we are working with a medical device company right now who has created a product for birthing. And one of our birth podcasts said, I really feel like the cost of giving birth in this country is too high, so I don't want to add to that cost. And really, to me, like that was a very protective method that she's using to say, these are my beliefs. This is why I don't feel like this is a good fit for us. So you've got those people, but then you've got a whole other group of podcasts who are like, hey, I'm good. I just want to get advertisers, right? So I don't care how much, how much it's going to cost my audience or whether I really like the product. I just want to get ads in. But I also feel like, to me, I look at blogs and I look at YouTube a lot because I feel like they're, based in content creation. And, like with YouTube in particular, you've got all of those pre-recorded ads that play at the beginning and the middle and all over. But then you also have a lot of product placement in YouTube videos as well, and host read ads of products as well. So I believe that there is a place for both. And if you're a podcast, exactly. Yeah. If you're a podcaster that just wants to run through and get as many advertisers as you can, and it's not important to you to protect your audience, then there is a place for that. But then there's also a place for those podcasters who really feel like they're in a genuine relationship with their audience, and they're not, I hate to say it like this, but they're not in it for the money, right? They're in it because they want to create a genuine relationship. They want to provide great content, and they also want to make money, right? They want to be paid for what they're doing. And we all love to buy product and service. And my guess is, Todd, that you really do like GoDaddy, right? Like you probably really use their services, and you're like, hey, there's a million hosting providers out there. You should go with GoDaddy because they're not only a hosting provider, they're so much more, right? So we all want to buy products and services that we think are going to edify our lives in some way. So I don't think it is always as black and white as, as we might think.
But at the same time, GoDaddy and I have had a few rough points. Early on, it was Danica Patrick, and that, it's all hot and sexy women advertising type stuff. And that was a period of time that luckily transitioned. And then they had a founder who did some stupid stuff like shooting an elephant, and then it was up on social media. There was all kinds of weird stuff that happened. Mm-hmm. Through the time I've had GoDaddy as a sponsorship. But I went to him and said, hey, something's got to change, because I'm getting feedback and I need to tell them something. And I would just tell the audience straight up that was dumb, and be very.
You got linked up with some of that stuff.
Yeah, right? Of course, yeah. And so for me, there was some rough weather there for a while, but I told the audience, listen, I have expressed my displeasure. I have told them how I feel, and we think that there is change coming. We're going to give them a chance. And they did. They transitioned the company off of that look to being more global, inclusive. They introduced all kinds of stuff for, they went mainstream, and they did what they needed to do. And if they hadn't, there's no way GoDaddy would continue to be a sponsor on my show, because of just some of that stuff had to make the transition. Now, would have that been an expensive thing to walk away from? Holy smoke. You have no idea. Yeah, it would have been. But today, they've done everything they can, and they had a change of leadership and all that went on a number of years ago that immensely helped, because then I could say, ladies, look at what they're doing. And this is why you can support them with your dollars. And so I think we're in a world today where a lot of that's going to be becoming more prevalent as well, because of everything else that's going on in the world. But I think from a podcaster standpoint, though, there's three. I break down podcasters into three categories. You broke the ones that want to make money. It's those that have the hobbyist. They don't care. They're never. Right. They don't want to have it. There's the middle of group that's, I want to make some money, but they're the ones that don't answer their email for 2 weeks.
Those are the ones that sign up for programmatic advertising, Todd, too.
Yes.
Not necessarily.
This conversation maps directly to what's happening in programmatic advertising, right? There's less control, right? There's platforms out there. I used to work for one of them that was setting up. You could go in and set insertion points, right?
Yeah.
You could. About the only thing you could do is go and select of advertising categories, right?
Yeah.
You didn't get the chance to say,
no,
I don't want this brand. I don't want that brand. Yeah. You could only go and say, I want lifestyle advertising, right? Or things like that, which falls us back into the area which we're talking about here. We don't want to be involved in. There's a risk, right?
Yeah.
Of getting ads that conflict with your particular brand relationship with your audience.
But that middle group is still, even though they think they want to make money, they still hold the traits of that other group of podcasters that is very, very serious about their show. That trait of audience protection and audience,
right?
Well, no, host reputation. follows into that middle, all those groups. I think it's universal.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the other thing to bring up too is that, the IAB released their advertising study from 2019, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago now. And they broke down the different types of ads. And what I think about it, I don't know that they broke down dollars. I think they just broke down percentages, but post-read ads still way out, way any other form of advertising in the podcast space. And, I don't think that I would be naive enough to say that they'll stay in that position forever, but I would love to just have them stay there as long as possible because, I think that when you have a host read ad, there is so much control from a program level about the types of companies that you sponsor and do you like the product? Do you align with them from a values perspective, right? Because like you're saying, Todd, I think now today more than ever, making sure that you align with a company's values and their messaging is very important because it's a direct reflection on you.
That's right.
And, so I just feel like there is so much control with a host read ad and so much more benefit to the advertiser and to the audience. So I really hope that we can sustain the host read ad for as long as possible.
It's just like I've been a Geico insurance user for years in Hawaii. That's all I ever had. I moved to Michigan. I picked up USAA just because it was some recommendations, reason for Michigan for USAA. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of converted. So, for me, if USAA came and said, "Hey, you want to advertise with me?" I mean, man, let's rock and roll. And if Geico came to me, I'd say, "Okay, I've had a good experience with you." I would, but my level of engagement. Now, State Farm calls, I'm going to tell them pack sand because I've had bad experience with State Farm. So I think that it really boils down to, again, what we've experienced in life and products that we can stand behind. And where someone may have had a good experience with State Farm and had their roof replaced when it should have been, but weren't denied like I was. So, for me, it's a little bit of, okay, I'm never going to advertise State Farm. If I'm going to talk very badly about State Farm, how do you guys like that? I just shied you away from State Farm. And it's that kind of a conversation that media buyers should die for. They should die for that type of an endorsement. And that's why there's such value in host read ads. And that could have been a host read ad to a certain extent,
An anti-ad.
Well, if you're going to support something and you've had a bad experience with someone else, it's okay. Now, the company may not want you to, but maybe in comments throughout your show, you can, over the years, your audience will already know who you don't like. Same thing. I've had a company approach me that wanted to advertise with me. I said, why don't you go listen to this episode, and then tell me if you still want to advertise with the show. Never heard from them again. So...
in the early days of the medium, sponsors would come in and sponsor a podcast, and the host would trash the advertiser.
I never did that.
No, I know, but it happened, right? The advertiser would be told that once they send a product out, they can't guarantee that it's going to be a positive ad, right? So back in the early days, that did happen, and I thought it was amusing.
Heather, you're going to love this one. An advertiser come to me with a big budget, big, really, really, really big. And they want to advertise on a specific show. I said, that's not a good fit. I don't think you're going to get value there. Well, we want to advertise on it because who it is. Right. So I made them sign a disclaimer.
Smart.
That's saying you will take what you get. I'm not responsible. I've advised you not to advertise in this. And I was, that was like $50,000. And it was only going to be 2 spots on a show. So very short run. And I made him sign this long disclaimer, and we ran the advertising. And of course, it did exactly what I thought it would do. It generated two conversions. And they came back to me, what happened? And I'm like, here's the piece of paper you signed. Write me the check. So sometimes advertisers can get in their own way too. And
right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that advertisers do that more than I wish they would.
Yeah.
They look at shows and they're like, well, I like this show.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, but it's not a good fit for you. But I like it, so we're just going to advertise there. And
or the boss likes it. It's not
exactly,
even,
right?
Go buy that show.
Well, that's the question, right? Are they buying the show? Or are they buying the host? Or are they buying the idea of the show? I don't know. I mean,
yeah, that is the question. And it's sometimes it's hard to say what the answer is.
And then they call you and need some make goods. I'm like, well, didn't we talk about that this wasn't a great fit? But you insisted anyway. And no, you can't have any make goods. And in next campaign, if you want to continue, let's try these shows.
Well, but I also think to kind of, go in just a bit of a different direction. One of the things that I think a lot of advertisers don't realize about podcast is how slow moving a medium it is. It really is a very slow moving medium. It's not something like, social media ads where you can just jump on and, see instant results. It's not like, and because the way people consume podcasts, they consume them over a period of time. Even when you're talking about dynamically inserted ads, it's over a period of time. So I think that it's so important for advertisers to realize that you're not going to place an ad in a podcast today and get results today. It just doesn't work that way in podcasts. It's a long medium.
I briefed this exact topic 3 times before contracts are signed.
Right.
I say, do not call me for the first 2 weeks. You're going to be freaking out the first 2 weeks. This is not going to come up on performance for at least 2 weeks. And this is a conversation we have. And I actually have it in my contract to make them understand. And this is why I don't do 1-month deals. Because it takes, like you said, it's slow moving. It takes at least 2 weeks to come up on performance. And I said, and by the way, remember, you're going to get it on the back end. When this campaign ends, it's going to invariably, day 3, ring, we're freaking out. What's going on? I'm like,
right. It's a game of frequency.
Did you not listen to what I had? Read what we've sent you and calm down. And if the ones that spend the least amount of money are the biggest pains, they just call you 20 times a day, it seems. But those that spend big money, they're like, okay, another.
Or the famous test campaigns. I love those.
I don't do them.
Right.
And there was something, Robin, you and I went on we were at, I learned something valuable from Leo Laporte's wife. You were with me.
Lisa.
Yeah. And Lisa and I were standing at NAB. This is what, 3-4 years? You were with me 3-4 years ago, maybe 5.
And was it in the hallway?
It was in the hallway, yeah.
That's right, where all the podcasters came walking through. I think we were doing an interview with the guy from National Association of Broadcasters, right? So
Lisa said something to me that had a profound change the way I did business. She says, I said, how you stop from cherry picking? And she says, I tell them no, they have to take it all or nothing. And I'm like,
Shows,
yeah.
So you bundle.
You take it all, or you take nothing. I don't let them dictate which shows. Right. And that in itself had enough. But it's amazing when you tell a media buyer, no, you have to take all those shows.
Right.
If you want you're actually, what they're trying to get is a 2 or 3 at the top of the list, and they want to ignore the 25 other ones. And I'm like, take it all or nothing. And my podcasters also know that that's my strategy, and they're good with that. And it's worked out.
That's the same thing that Podcast One did for many years when I was working down there. It's always bundle buys. So if you want access to Adam Carolla podcast,
that's right. They have to.
You have to buy like 10 other shows that are part of the buy, which scales the ad buy tremendously, right? And it also spreads that frequency out, which ultimately will drive a better ROI for the campaign.
Yeah, it's amazing when you say, would you rather have 8 spots a month or 800?
Right.
And they're like,
it's all about frequency.
800.
That's the key.
You get 800? Yeah. If you buy this whole stack, and by the way, the the 25 or 100 shows that are below the top 3 are only 1/10 of the total budget, and yet you're going to get this entire frequency. But oh my God, we can talk all day about media buyers.
Heather, I wanted to ask you too about your views on targeting. There's been a lot of discussion in the industry, and a lot of the bigger, more commercial, professional hosting platforms like Art19 and others out there are really pushing the IP-based targeting, right? What are you seeing as far as actual performance on that, or are you doing many campaigns utilizing that technology?
That's a really good question. And we haven't done many campaigns using that technology. We've really focused a lot of our energies on mid-level podcasts. And so most of our podcasts have just been too small. I would say, gosh, in the last 3 or 4 months, we've gotten really large, over 1 million download podcasts we're representing. And so we're just starting to have the inventory to be able to sell those shows in that way. And I would say that agencies are very interested in that type of buying. But I get very nervous with it because it still is a really small, piece of the pie. So yeah.
What about attribution? And what do you think about attribution?
Well, I know that this is a very, very big hot topic, and I don't know exactly how both of you stand on it, but I really like attribution. I think that it's something that the industry really needs because it gets us into the game, essentially. I think when I started in podcast advertising, which has been almost 5 years ago now, there was so little information. And what I find with attribution is that it's not that it changes everything for the buyer, but what it does do is it gives them a level of security. And so what I always tell the people that I work with, I say, we've got 3 bits of information we're going to look at for your campaign. Number 1, we're going to look at the download. So we've got our hosting provider. How many downloads does the hosting provider say that your campaign received? Next, we're going to look at your unique URL or your promo code, because you're going to have your own way of tracking it. And so internally, let's look at the kind of results you're getting. And then the third piece is attribution tracking. And about 45% of the shows that we work with host on Libsyn. And as you guys know, Libsyn doesn't allow the attribution tracking. So only a selection of the shows that we work with, we can use attribution tracking on. So then I'll say, this is just another piece of information to observe the campaign. And, then I'll say, we can take that and we can put all of those bits of information together to determine how the campaign performed. But I think what it does is, you got to figure that these buyers are responsible for results, right? So they're contracted with their company to make sure that they're making wise buying decisions to get results from their campaigns. And they have to have some information to give to their boss to say, look, see, it actually worked. It really did what we said it would do, or, it actually was successful. And so the attribution allows us to be, to kind of play in the same arena as a lot of their other digital marketing campaigns that they're buying on. And so I see the value.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Oh, I was just going to say, of course, I get the policy or the privacy, piece of the pie. And I understand that audio is different than a lot of other forms of media because it's not as easy to opt out of an audio, tracking as it is to opt out of all of the other things. And so I get that piece, but I feel like from ad buying perspective, it's a really important piece of the overall ad buy.
2 things: they can't opt in or they can't opt out. There's no choice they're given.
Right.
And another thing too is attribution. I'm kind of curious how much actual results you get, because with IPv6 starting to show up in phones, I could have as many as 20 different IPv6 IPs in a single day. And with cookies going away,
right,
and the CCPA and GDPR and being able to do all that stuff, I guess here's my point. I'm all about data. I like collecting data. I like being able to have great information to give back to the media buyers. I think but my problem, probably the same as Libsyn, is that we're taking that information without permission with the podcaster and sharing that information. So this is where I'm cool with attribution. So long as you make sure that whoever's doing your attribution doesn't take that attribution, number one, the advertiser, and number two, the middle person, if you're using a service to do attribution, doesn't take that data and use it for retargeting.
Right.
Because this is what we're getting asked for, is we want the attribution data and we want to be able to retarget. And this is where I have a major problem. If we go to Amazon, we go to Google, we have all opted in to allow Amazon to track us and do all this stuff. If there was a method we could allow the podcasters opt in, I think I'd be fine with it. I think the podcasters, as a matter of fact, I did a survey of my own audience and more than 50% said they would opt in.
Right.
And, but the simple fact that we can't, I think this is where, and I know so how much of that attribution data, it just gives you a little more.
It's not a complete picture,
but how much more of the picture is it enough to push them over the edge to renew when they may not have renewed? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? What are you getting? Because there's going to be so many links that are going to come from the direct click.
Right. I would definitely say, so the biggest question that I get from buyers is, well, what kind of conversion rate do podcasts have?
Yep.
We want to know what kind of conversion rates they have. And that's such a hard thing because we don't really have a lot of data. And so it's like, I always feel like, well, I can make something up. Do you want me to make an answer up for you and just say that this is what's going to be? But, and what I try to say to them is I try to say, podcasts are somewhere in between digital and offline. If you could just think of them as not necessarily being a digital medium, I think that that's helpful. But, to answer your question about attribution, I think we definitely have had buys come in because we have capabilities, to use attribution tracking. And I think we've renewed buys because of that. How much it actually has provided us with good hard data, I feel like that's a whole nother question, right? I think that it's more a perception.
Yeah, perception. Than
it is an actual oh wow, these hard facts led us to see that this campaign was super successful, So yeah, I think it's all just about perception.
Nikki's got a question in the chat room, and I'll take a shot at it. And Heather, you can follow up with your thoughts. She says, "Hi guys, what's the minimum period of time you suggest advertising their runs that will allow them to see the real value of their buy?" My personal opinion is 12 spots at a minimum on a weekly show. That's kind of my minimum.
So would that be, Todd, would that be one spot per episode?
One spot per episode per week.
Right.
If you're a weekly show. If you're twice weekly show, you run double, and you're going to come up on, and it also depends on, it's a hard question to answer, because if it's a new advertiser, you're going to spend the first couple of episodes introducing them, educating them to build this story. Then by the third episode, maybe you're kind of already done introducing it to the audience, and you're starting to really drive the call to action. If you're just running the same, I don't believe in running the same ad copy from week 1 through week 12. You gotta have some variety there. But I think 12. I don't know. What do you think, Heather?
Well, I think that my answer is it depends.
That's true too.
I usually recommend people start with 8 to 12 ads, what I tell advertisers. But I also always talk to them about what kind of brand awareness do you have? So if, for instance, I did a campaign once with Match.com, and they told me that they had 98%, market awareness, right? So that means that most people, if you take 100 people, essentially 98% or 98 of them are going to say, yes, I know what Match.com is, right? So if you run an ad today for Match.com, no one's like, what is that? I've never heard of that before, right? But a lot of the brands in the podcast space are new companies. And so if you're a brand new company, and I've never heard of, we've got an advertiser that I think has a really cool product. They're called Kyrgyz. They're like these felt flippers that are made in Kyrgyzstan. Well, I've never heard of Kyrgyz. I'm guessing neither of you have, right? So if you hear one ad, are you going to be like,
no,
man, I heard that one ad. I'm going to go run out and buy a pair of Kyrgyz because those sounded awesome. Like you're going to have to create some awareness of the product with your audience before they're going to make a buying decision. So I think it really does depend on the company that's coming to you. And if the company already has brand awareness, then they, I think, can run fewer ads and see success. Whereas if the company that nobody knows exists, it's going to take more.
You know, Kyrgyz, though, I can just see myself, oh man, I'm wearing these Kyrgyz. They feel really good. They're comfy. And you know what? My audience is going to go, you're lying. You're not wearing Kyrgyz. You're running around barefoot like you always talk about in your show. You're not wearing Kyrgyz. Whereas so then it's that host alignment, you know? So
it is. Yep, exactly. If they know you well enough to know you wouldn't be wearing felt slippers then.
You know, and it's kind of a, now Rob, I'm sure Rob has got the pipe and the slippers, you know. So
oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Hey Rob, you laugh, but you got the persona that that's, you know, I'm teasing you. But no, so Nikki, I think it's a good question, but here's what I would say not to do. If you have an advertiser comes to you and you do a weekly show and you don't know who they are and they say, we want to do a test buy for 4 weeks, don't do that. And do at least a minimum of a 2-month run, especially if you're weekly, because even if they spend a little bit less, they may never come back. You got one chance to impress that advertiser and make them re-sign a contract. So if you do just a month, you get 4 spots for, if it's Match.com, maybe you can do that, like Heather said. But Kyrgyz,
well, it's also hard too, Todd, too, that, you know, attribution for a long time has really been linked up with using a promo code, right?
Yeah.
And that's been something that I think doesn't always reflect true performance of a campaign. I mean, there's been companies, I mean, look at what Squarespace was able to do with their company, just advertising on podcasts. They built a big company, just being committed long term to using podcasts as a lever to grow their brand. And they successfully did that. Everybody knows Squarespace now, right? Yep. That was initially built just on podcasting, I would say. I mean, right.
So how have I kept GoDaddy for 15 years? There's promotion in the blog posts. There's banners on the website. It's in the show. I get people come to my website that's never listened to the show, sees the banner, and clicks the banner. So I still drive, but it's because I had used 3 phases. And I'm blown away by the number of podcasters that don't put sponsor message in their show notes, or we make digital banners as part of a added value for a campaign. Just because some people see, some people hear, and some people can. But if you don't have a website to put anything on, there's nothing you can do there anyway. And that's
Todd, you've also trained your audience to know that you have promo codes, whether or not you mention it in your show or not. You have a landing page that people can go to get a discount, right?
That's right.
So it really doesn't matter if you mention GoDaddy in your show. People will remember that you have that available to you, and it probably comes up in the search results too. Right?
Well, yes, it does. And you know, there's long-term value to that as well.
I think that's the biggest reason that you've held on to GoDaddy over the years. It's not so much of the mention of GoDaddy in your show.
It's a dedicated.
I think it's you build a reputation for being a representative of this brand.
There's a dedicated landing page for my sponsor. I do this for every sponsor I have a dedicated landing page for them.
Right.
And in my show, I don't tell them to go to GoDaddy. I tell them go to geeknewscentral.com/GoDaddy. That's replicated more than 1,000 times. So my audience, and I tell my audience, tell your friends to go to geeknewscentral.com. I don't want them going to GoDaddy. I want them coming to my website and getting the promo code, then going to GoDaddy.
So in some ways, your show is a promotion for the opportunity to go to your website.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I've done that for a few other brands. For a while I was, and this is a whole nother topic, and we're almost out of time, but Heather, I've experimented with just regular CPA campaigns. And I've experimented with them. And here's, and we can spend an hour on this.
That's cost per acquisition.
Yeah, see, I've not done it. I've just found something on Commission Junction or whatever that I loved, and I played around with it. And for a while I was doing Hertz. I was pushing Hertz. And I'd do a promotion in the show just like I promoted GoDaddy, but it was to sound like a Hertz. I'd send them over the Hertz page, and I got some traction that way. But whenever we've tried someone come in and say, hey, we'd like to do a hybrid campaign where we're going to give you a CPM, but we're going to also pay you out on performance on CPA, those have always ended horribly. I don't know what it is with CPA. Podcasters, if they somehow, there's some mental thing in their head, including me, that if you're not getting a paycheck, a guaranteed paycheck, it's just, I don't, the response is different. It's very, very odd. And also, another thing too, you can't trust any of these affiliate marketing. I can tell you horror stories about Commission Junction, some of the things they do. So,
really?
Well, that could explain, Todd, why there's not a lot of ROI on running those campaigns. It's because there's some fraud going on.
You said it. I did not. And I'm not.
Could be some fraud.
And I'm not implying
that. Right.
I recommend that people do affiliate or CPA campaigns when their shows are small. So I think that it's a good idea if you're a new podcaster to start your ad and formulate your ad to accept advertisers, educate your audience that you have advertisers. And so in my opinion, if you use these CPA campaigns or these affiliate programs, number one, it's a good practice for you as a host to understand what is it like to put together ad reads? How does my audience react to them, and how can I get better? Because there's nothing on the line for you.
That's right.
And then you can practice that until you get to a place where your audience is large enough so that you can get, paid advertisers. So I recommend that people do CPA campaigns in those, situations. But I agree with you, Todd. We've never had a positive experience with the CPA campaign, so we won't run them.
So if you are a podcaster and you're going to go do a CPA campaign on your own, always try to go direct to the company and do one through the company that is not managed by a Commission Junction or someone like that they have their own internal CPA system. You are going, I'm just telling you.
And there are some great companies out there. Like I know AWeber, for instance, is super invested in the podcast space. They're always at podcast events. They have their own internal affiliate program. So, I think that that's a really good recommendation, Todd. Like find those companies that are already here wanting to support the podcast industry and then create alliances with those companies.
And only go to those that have their own internal program, not being managed by any other
third party.
And you need to ask them, how long do the cookies stick? All those types of questions so that you,
Well, I also wanted to mention too that podcast advertising, I know we're spending a lot of time talking about attribution and promo codes and things like that, but we also have to realize that a lot of people don't use promo codes, right? Or they'll forget the promo code, or they hear the ad or they hear about the company, and 6 months later they'll go to the website and finally buy, right? And there's no way to necessarily track that. I mean, a lot of even in the cookie attribution stuff, a lot of those cookies will have expired by then. So there are long-term benefits from podcast advertising that are not always easily attributed to a particular campaign on a conversion. So, I had that issue early on in my radio show days when I was starting to work with some advertisers with my show. They wanted to just come in and do, just buy short duration campaigns, and because they weren't very educated, back in those days, it was difficult, and that's really all I did was host reads back then on the radio too. So I was driving this message to them that what you're buying is brand awareness is what you're buying on my show. You're not necessarily buying instant conversions, because a lot of the buyers think digital advertising is like AdWords, right? Where you're come in and you buy a campaign and you place this on a website, and it's all tracked on instant conversions, right? It's like bam, bam, it's like almost like crack, right? You just, you're always looking for that instant results, right? Where podcasting is really a massively delayed result medium. And I agree with this whole conversation that we've had about it, because that's been my own experience with it, and really drove that message to those advertisers, is that buying into my show is building impressions on people that are bringing awareness to your show in the long term as well.
And we are out of time, but
we are out of time.
Yeah. So what I always tell podcasters, if they're going to do CPA, you have to train your audience to go to your website and click the link. Mm-hmm. Don't even give them the promo code in the show, because if they go to the website and use the promo code, there is a disconnect, because the systems don't always track. Most of the systems are track the hyperlink in a website, on the website, versus that's what happens on Commission Junction. If you go to GoDaddy and enter my promo code, it doesn't register at CJ. But if you go to my website and click on the link and go to GoDaddy, it gets registered.
Right.
So if you're using any type of Commission Junction type of system, they have that. If they go to the website manually and put in the promo code, you will not get credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's true.
I also think that it's really valuable for podcasters to encourage their audience to use a promo code, because I think, obviously, to your point, Rob, most people don't use promo codes, right? And so, but I think that if you're a host out there, that you should say, hey, you guys, buy these products that I'm advertising, and make sure that you use the promo code, because it helps me, it helps the show. Because I think the average listener doesn't really consider that. And I think as podcast hosts, sometimes we take those things for granted. But you really do need to encourage your audience to use those links, use those codes, because it can make a huge difference in the performance that the advertiser sees that they're attributing to you, the host and the show.
And if Heather brings you a deal, the promo code is safe to use standalone. I'm just talking about only when you're doing self-serve CPA. Okay, because Heather's going to go back and they're going to make sure that the promo code they got entered manually got counted and you got credit. So it's just your self-service CPAs, have them click the link. And your regular advertising campaigns that come from me, you can just tell them to use the promo code on the website. So, Heather, anything before we leave? My God, this went super fast.
Yeah, no, just thank you guys so much for having me on. I mean, I think that the podcast industry is obviously just continuing to grow, and the ad industry in podcast is so dynamic, and it's flourishing. And despite, the coronavirus, everything is going really well. So, just know that there is definitely opportunity in ad sales and podcasts.
And how can they find you? What's the best way?
Yeah, they can go to truenativemedia.com. And if you're an advertiser or if you're a podcaster and you want to talk with us, we've got different options there. As you guys mentioned, I'm really active on LinkedIn. So you can, catch me on LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time and would love to chat with any of you. Again,
it's truenativemedia.com is the website, and their Twitter address is the same. Anyway, I'm Todd at blueberry.com, at Geek News on Twitter. Rob?
I'm on Twitter as well, at Rob Greenlee, and you can send me an email if you want, robg@libsyn.com.
Heather, thanks for coming on and spending time with us today. It's been our pleasure to have you as our guest, and thanks for sharing your insights. It's always fun because, you say stuff and I'm just like, yep. So it's nice to know we all have some of the similar experiences out there. So
yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yep. Everyone, we'll see you on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 Pacific for our Wednesday show. And hopefully tune in. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.